So, Marcus, thanks so much for sitting down today. Welcome to the Robin Zander Show. I've been wanting to have a round two on the record conversation with you since we first met earlier this year. Marcus Sawyer is the founder of EQ, which is a community connecting diverse folks in high-level careers with organizations that are hiring for them. He's also a startup advisor, a multiple-time founder, has worked in a huge variety of industries, which I'm excited to talk about. One of the few people I meet or have met recently who's worked in almost as many different industries and careers and sort of side hustles as I have. But also, I was really impressed with your thoughtfulness when we sat down for the first time, and then seeing you on stage in Las Vegas and sort of the community that you've built. I'm really excited to talk today about EQ, your work, sort of your upbringing and what's led to this place, and then the thoughtfulness behind your work. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You were just telling me about Mark Cuban trying to sell sponsorship for the Dallas Mavericks. Will you start with that story? Because I think it plays into like the humility and the willingness to do the work of being a CEO, being a founder, being a fire starter, being the person going out and like getting something rolling, which I look up to you as somebody who's just like willing to put in the hustle.
Yeah, so I was watching something, I think it was on YouTube actually, and he was just talking about how he got sponsors, and not even sponsors, like season ticket holders. And they were like, well, Dallas Mavericks, we never had like a big base of season ticket holders.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, well, how do you go out and get them? He said, well, I knew who came to the games, so I picked up the phone and called them. The guy was like, what? He picked up the phone and called them. He's like, yeah, like. And then we started to convert it, and then we started to drive forward. So there's something to be said for leading by example, no matter where you are
right
in the work, right? Or where you are in the process. And obviously you don't have to do it all the time, but even showing that that's possible, I think gives you a little bit of an insight on how it works personally, but also shows the team what's possible as well at times.
Yeah. I love that. And the humility of like willing to put in the work. Something that I struggle with and I see a lot of founders struggle with is knowing when to put in the work and also when to let go of the reins, right? You've been a part of implementing innovation at really large companies in the world, right? And we'll get to some of your background. How do you decide, in the present moment, what to focus on and what to delegate and what to leave behind?
Yeah, I think in a startup, you think about prioritization and what's business critical, and then where you can have the most impact. So if there are areas where you have some expertise and maybe not deep expertise, but let's take sales, for instance. If you're thinking about the sales process, and then as part of that, like, what are you going to sell? Okay. Once you go through the process, you need to figure out like, how are you going to sell it? And then you'll need some materials. So who's best to start with the materials? Probably you, because you're going to go and have those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You may not gloss them up, but you may as well get that started. You can't really outsource that part.
Mm-hmm.
So I think looking at your area of expertise is probably the best place to start, because then you can actually add value to the business from a practitioner standpoint. I was on a call today with one of our developers, and we have like a refine and reflect session every month.
Nice.
And we go
across the whole company?
Yeah, and it's small. It's just kind of internal, some of the leaders, and we just talk through like what's happened and what we're planning to do moving forward. And I've got a framework that I've created, which is called the 10 Ps. And the 10 Ps has every single thing that we believe you need to do in a business on one page.
Super cool. So, two questions. Sorry to interrupt. Could I see the 10 Ps?
Yeah.
And do you know them well enough you can just list them off for us?
Yeah, I can list I can list them in order. So you've got like purpose. So what's your purpose? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? The positioning that you have, like how do you position what you're actually trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
Also who your prospects are. So who is this for? What is the profit model? How do you prototype it? Also who your partners are and the people that are involved in that process.
Super cool.
And then the process is the other part, like how's that actually going to get executed and done?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a one sheet. And some of it I'd learned where we had something at 4 Ps in the organization I was with before.
And just keep building on it.
Yeah, and your product's the other one. And then I was like, well, there's 10 Ps, and there was also like a well-known business model canvas that was created.
Of course.
And so kind of looking at that, looking at the 4Ps and like, what could you create? Because I think a lot of the projects or things that you create can be done on one sheet.
Yep.
So a lot of the time before we have meetings, we'll just give out the one sheet. People put it together. They can send it around before we start, and then we understand what we're talking about. So, and then I mean, today, for instance, where I was going with one of the devs is like had me down as sales, which is great because, and then they had them down as infrastructure, and then they had somebody else down as business continuity, kind of the between. And I think knowing where you can add value is where you can start, and you can start things, right? And then maybe to scale them and bring them along, somebody else starts to come into that. So if your background is marketing or background is product or your background is sales, you should probably bring that into your business because otherwise it's a miss.
Right. Yeah. Core competencies.
Yeah.
I just want to focus on this idea of a one sheet for example, because I don't do that in business, and I totally could, but I do that in my, let's say, my physical practice, right? I'm a dancer, I'm an acrobat. I'm working on a bunch of skills at any given time. Right now I'm working on handstands and like a 1-arm 60-second handstand. And so I break down the learning process in my physical practice, or actually another domain I do it is in language acquisition, is like, what am I trying to accomplish? What is the learning process for the next 3 to 18 months in a language or in a movement on a single one page? But I don't do that in business. And I really like the challenge, the invitation to be like, no, don't write up a business plan. And also don't just hold a meeting where there's like some loose notes. What is the objective of this project or this campaign literally in a single piece of paper? I like the constraint of that.
We built EQ on a one-pager.
Super cool.
And we managed to hire a team, build product, get customers, drive MRR, and then ARR and be profitable in the first year from doing that. Now we then scale that out and start to build the business kind of plan, as it were, once we know what that revenue is. But it's pretty, if you can't explain it on that simply, on a sheet, then it's probably a little bit too complex as you start.
Super
I imagine.
Cool. The other thing that you were talking about is focusing on the core competencies. Like you as a leader, what are the things that you excel at, and trying to really focus. I love this idea of, for me, what can I do really well? And rather than try to fix the areas where I'm deficient, hire for them, solve for them externally so that I can really get supremely good at the places that I excel.
Yeah.
What are the places that you excel?
Sales, I would say. Business development.
Yeah.
Strategy.
Yeah.
So kind of thinking through what's next, just having an understanding of when there isn't something that exists, how we can go about creating that. So probably the creativity side.
Cool.
But
so I have a question about sales.
Yeah, sure.
The very first like job listed on your LinkedIn is fitness.
Yeah.
And I saw that and I just was like, my man, right? I've worked as a personal trainer. I've worked in sales in fitness. Will you speak to that experience? How old you were? It was in LA, as I understand it. What was that like?
It was in London and it was called LA Fitness.
Cool.
So that was what everybody aspired to in London. Yeah. And it wasn't a time where fitness was like a big deal.
Yeah. What years was that?
I want to say it was, in my mind, for some reason, I've got 2006, but 2004.
Nice. Yeah, that was just like a couple of years before I was in the fitness industry.
Yeah. So I used to play sports. I played academy level professional football and all that type of stuff. And my dad,
soccer, football, not American football. Yeah. Cool. So, I assume it's the only kind of football that I care about. Keep going.
Yeah, no, I played for a club called Brentford. They're actually in the Premier League this year, which is cool. Nice. So I've done my schoolboy there. And my dad was an Olympian, so he fought in the Olympics in Taekwondo. So always been on the sports side. And my idea was get a job in a gym and then continue sports after, in between doing kind of football scholarship. And then they didn't have any typical gym jobs. It was selling memberships. Right, you had to go out and do outreach.
Which is just, I mean, like it's the one level up from like door-to-door sales.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a grind.
So
being told no again and again and again and again. I know it so well.
It was crazy. It was a crazy time, but and I remember being paid. So my basic salary was like £13,000. And I was like, and the only way, but you could make commission on everything that you
Right,
sold.
of course.
I always tell my son these stories, and I've sound like this like old guy, like telling him like back in my day. But he always, like, before he goes to bed, he doesn't want me to read book. He wants me to tell him an LA Fitness story because he can't believe it. Because I say the office I was working from is the same size as your closet. That's just over there.
Yeah,
and there was 3 of us that were sitting in there. And there was one guy, he always used to, and I always tell him the story, he always used to drink these protein shakes, but he never worked out. And he thought that if he drank the protein shakes, that would help him and we had to explain to him that that's not gonna get you there. It was quite funny at the time. But yeah, we were selling gym memberships and going outside, and in London it rains a lot. So it wasn't like LA. So you go outside, and we're in a basement area. So our gym was in like an alleyway. And so you had to come outside.
Called LA Fitness. I love it. I love this.
Then you had to go upstairs because it was in the basement, go outside, and then go onto the main road. No one knew where the gym was, so you'd never get any walk-ins. And so if somebody walked in, this was my goal by the end, you would definitely leave them with a gym membership. It doesn't matter. And your family was leaving with one, and your company. Because once you came into that basement, that was it.
Yeah, if you made that much effort to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that was the first experience, but it was an absolute grind. But I met some good people at the time, and they were fun. And then one of my friends, actually, when I moved to my next role, he was like, how did you get to, because I went to a company called Career Builder, and that was like a big jump up. And then I brought him into there, and then brought a few of my friends in, and then it was a good time. So.
What was your first job? Like when you were a kid or whatever?
Yeah, so, paper rounds. I had multiple paper rounds, and then I would outsource them. So I'd get 2 or 3 paper rounds, and then I would outsource them actually to my sisters, and which is quite funny because they were too young to get a paper round at the time.
Yeah.
And so I would do that. Football I got paid for when I was younger, which is cool as well. So that didn't feel like work. Just like different odd jobs. I've done some like market research stuff. A company called Ipsos Murray, where I was like in a call center, calling people, asking them about like their gas and electricity and utility.
Yeah.
And then one of my sisters, she worked opposite there from me, and she was like, you need to slow down. This is my younger sister. She goes, you're just going too fast, and like you're putting up our call volumes too high. Now everyone keeps setting up that. She was just there eating her food at the time, and I was like, but I want to go to Miami, and I need to make some more money, and everything's commission only. And she was like, but just slow down, And she's actually a global HR director for a company now, my sister. So yeah, that was fun. So I always worked with people that were close or local to me, kind of going through the grind at the same time.
Yeah, interesting. And when I think of you these days, I think of biz dev and community build, right? And I hear, that's why I asked about LA Fitness in London, right? And your early work experience. You've been selling or training the skill of selling gets a bad rap, but what I think of it is relationship building, right? For a long, long time. Like that is just such a core competency that you've been training your whole life, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think if you're close to the revenue, it's one of the biggest opportunities to build a business. And so whether it was that or I was doing nightclub promotions at one point.
Let's go there, because that's something we've talked about offline. Tell me about that gig that you started.
Yeah, that was we had in London. There were a lot of like raves and things that were going on. So I had a couple of friends that were in that scene, and if you got people into the clubs, you get paid for the amount of people. So that you go. And then I was playing football. A lot of the football players wanted to go out. That was one thing. And then I put on a couple of like independent raves. One was called Keep It Moving. And we basically just like hired out this place in West London, charged people, had some DJs that came in and done that. And then while I was a career builder, I then evolved that business into something called Truly Vegas, which I had with my cousin, my little cousin at the time. So I always had like a family member or somebody that I would work with and bring in. He's doing like amazing now. He's in one of the fastest growing security companies globally, like software as a service company. So I've always kind of brought people who have been maybe a bit younger than me or even a bit older than me just around to like work together with. And we had this business where we would take people back and forth to Vegas and like organize their trips. So yeah, there was always that element of sales. And yeah, like you say, sales kind of gets a bad rap, and I really don't care. Because I feel like That's a reason when you look at a P&L,
Right.
there's a reason that sales is on
When
the
you
top
look
line.
at a business that makes a difference.
Yeah. You look at the P&L, there's a reason that sales sits on the top line. Doesn't sit in the middle, doesn't sit at the bottom, does it? It's in the top line. And without any sales, you can pretend it's a business.
Right.
But really, like, what is it? So I think it's super important, and it's something that if you have that as a skill, you can really figure out like what do you want to cultivate around that. But I do think the essence of sales has evolved over and it is about relationship building. It's about getting to know people. It's not about like, I mean, in one of my interviews, they were like, sell this bottle of water. Yeah. That was actually one of my interviews.
Yeah, totally.
And I was like, are you thirsty? Like, right? So you there's that element of sales, but then the other part is understanding what people want and trying to help them get there. And if you can help them directly, great. If not, also telling them that. Yep. Say, hey, like, I'm probably not the right person, but I know this and this person that I'm going to connect you.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Super
How do you feel about sales?
So my first gig as a kid, I was 5, and my dad told me we were going to plant pumpkins. And then whatever it was, 5 months later, we set up Robin's Pumpkin Patch and sold pumpkins for Halloween to like everyone in our zip code, right? Very rural town, right? And my father just had this idea of like, maybe Robin could sell pumpkins for Halloween.
Yeah.
And I remember at 5, 6, 7, I ran it for 5 years or something. The neighbors would come, like, weigh their pumpkin, pay the right amount for the pumpkin, and leave. And I would come home from school, and there'd be money sitting in the tin, right? Like, very country. Like, there was no security. Like, people could like walk away with a tin full of money. But you know, at 7 years old, coming home to find $100 in the little plastic or the little metal tin, and what nobody who came and got a pumpkin saw was the hours and days and weeks of sweat and toil of actually like planting the pumpkin seeds, nurturing those plants, growing big pumpkins, arranging. My mom's a visual artist, and you know, we made a sign that said Robin's Pumpkin Patch. I had a neighbor, Isaac, who was really creative, and we would dress up as scarecrows. So like white face, tiny little holes. You couldn't tell it was a human. Stand outside the pumpkin patch, and when a car goes by, just like point. Right? No facial, you can't see it's a person. It just looks like a dummy. And people would stop and be like, is that a robot? Like, what's going on here? Well, clearly we're going this way because there's a pumpkin patch and there's a scarecrow here.
It's the best way to learn and build a business. Just this weekend, my 6-year-old, I helped him. Well, he done it himself. He set up a croissant business. And so there's a store just around the corner from here. And you know exactly which one it is.
Cool.
And it sells French pastries.
Yeah,
and he made a deal. So he got a big stack of croissants, chocolate croissants, plain croissants. Yes. And before martial arts, because he goes to martial arts, we got them. He then took them to martial arts and then sold them after. Nice. And then he made a certain amount of money, and now he's going to go back and reload and get some more. So it was just, he was having conversations with people. He was learning how it was worked. And then he told me the other day he was in school and they were talking to him about, like, he was having a conversation around maths. If you have this many apples and you sell this, those kind of, he was like, that was so easy for me. I said, yeah, okay.
Because you've been
I wonder why. And he was like, no, daddy, it's not about money and making money. I was like, okay, but you now understand the process, right?
Yeah, and the function of it, right? Putting it into function.
Exactly.
Were you raised with that? I mean, your father was an Olympian, right? Like, were you raised with that kind of, I don't know if you think about it as competition or drive or chip on your shoulder, right? Where does that come from for you? And how are you trying to instill that into your son?
Yeah, so I think, was I raised with competition? Yeah, I would probably say that, like, combat sports are, pretty
fundamentally competitive.
And I done that for a while, and I was in the national squad and won championships and stuff, but it wasn't really for me. As far as like the chip, it was always circumstantial, like needed to do better. Because
against yourself, like you were your
environment. I got some friends who haven't made it for whatever reason, and I always knew that if I had a laptop and a phone, I could make money. So I was always competing with myself personally. And then the football thing didn't work out. I had friends that made it in the Premier League, which was great. And then it was like, how do you compete on that level from a business standpoint. So I went into business a lot earlier, and a lot of them are now coming back around that circle. Now they're trying to go into business.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've always like just been personally motivated to make stuff happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that came from parents or family. It was just, I'm going to do something that is important, meaningful, and is going to help to support me.
Yeah.
But it took a long time to figure that out. And I've got to be thankful for my family and parents around me at the time that gave me that time. Because sometimes you don't have that time, and you've got to do it a lot earlier.
Yeah. How are you thinking now, being a parent, of supporting that growth in your kids, giving them that time, but also, right, like it sounds like, don't want to assume, but they're growing up a little more, maybe more privileged than you did, or like, how are you supporting their development at their own pace?
Yeah, I think for the kids, it's about giving them the exposure and then them having the ability to make good choices. Mm-hmm. So maybe you are in a slightly different environment, and they say that in the necessity is the mother of all invention. So you then start to create, and you become resourceful and so on. So not taking it away from that, but just providing them that perspective and optionality. Mm-hmm. So, because you can't I don't believe you can raise your kids exactly how you were raised, because it's a different environment, different time.
Different world.
I mean, and the exposure that they're getting to information.
I didn't grow up with cell phones, right? Like,
right.
I didn't have a cell phone until late high school.
Yeah.
And feel blessed that I got one that early, right? Like,
and it's just, and it's managing that as well, that information flow, and how much information you're taking in, and then what you're doing with that. And they pick up things, I think they learn a lot quicker because of the exposure to the screens. Sure. Whether it's a handheld.
I consider myself digitally native, but I don't at all compare to like my 6-year-old nephew. Yeah. Right. Who has, had screens around him since he, was too young to know the difference.
Yeah. So I think it's, giving them the ability to think for themselves is really what I'm aspiring to. And if they can do that, then hopefully they can make the right choices for themselves versus giving them the things to make them feel comfortable.
Telling them this is the thing to do.
Yeah, or just giving them the things to make them feel comfortable. It's like, how do you get those things? Where did they come from?
Yeah.
Like, and exposing that, okay, you see that we pay with our card every time we go out, but so you don't see the cash. But there's actually something on this card. No, you can't just use a credit card. Like, how is that credit card funded? Yeah. Yeah. You got to pay it off at the end, and it's exposing them to those facets that might be rude away. Yeah, exactly. So
I want to tie that back to your business today, to EQ. But specifically, my impression, right? Obviously, I haven't worked within the inner workings of your business, but I've enjoyed meeting a couple of people on your team over the last 6 months or so. How do you think about nurturing, right? Leading by example, being willing to do the dirty work. Maybe you could tell the story of Howard Schultz, because that's just too good. While providing them the flexibility to learn, and also being ultimately the decision maker of your business, because it is your business.
Yeah, it's tough because you want to get stuff done, but you also know that if there's an investment ahead of time in learning, it will fuel the business for a longer period of time. So how do you then balance the two? And part of it is trying to say, okay, these are the things that I'm good at. And if you don't know whether you're good at something or not, try it. And try it for a period of time. Like, I've built websites, done some low code stuff, and I'm not great at that at all, but it gets us to a certain point. Right. And then I can at least hand over and more than just an idea in my head. So the next level is like, well, what's the idea in your head? Then can you write it out? Okay, you written it out. Then can you have the wireframes? And maybe you can build a little MVP. Then you give it to someone like, okay, I've got the baseline for it, and then I know where to go. And I think providing that environment again for individuals to think and flourish is almost what it's about. And that's not always been the way that I've thought about leadership, or because I was an individual contributor. Right. And it was just about winning.
And at really large companies too.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I would say at large, medium-sized companies to start with, maybe career build like 3,000 people, then 30,000, which is slightly different. So the management style needs to be different. And knowing what I know now, maybe I would do that differently again. Because you can leverage the power of people. But when you're in a corporate, you're always trying to come up and keep moving up.
And there's the politics of the ladder.
Yeah, and it's not always, you're not always thinking, the incentives are not always aligned with the growth of the business and the growth of you.
Yep.
And I think that you can combine that in your own organization because you can set the culture.
How do you think about, well, let's back up a little bit. I want you to tell the Howard Schultz story because I want to hear it again. And then tell me about culture at EQ and what is EQ is probably where we should start.
Yeah, so EQ in essence is a community. So it's EQ community that focuses on elevating people of color and diverse backgrounds into mid to senior level positions. And we do that by really giving people access. So I've got a framework, and you probably, as you start to maybe a bit more, I always have these frameworks, and it's 4 C's. And one of them is having that community that can support you, ensuring that you then have access to the careers that you need in order to be successful. But also really importantly is the connections and building those connections that ultimately, once you've got that melting pot, if you like, it leads to the capital, which then could change your life or could change your family's lives.
Yep.
So it's about cultivating that from the members' side. So there's one side of it where we've got members that join the platform, they have conversations, whether it's about business, Web3 or culture. And then we provide them access to opportunities that we get from companies that are inclusive. And the companies that are inclusive or striving to be inclusive, we give them access to this top 1% of premium talent that really interested in working with purpose-driven organizations that are going to be the next whatever moving forward. So yeah, that's
super cool. I hear marketplace, and I hear that's a difficult nut to crack because you have to have this perfect balance between organizations that are hiring and these high performance, high level folks who are looking to land careers. We've been talking about sort of playing to your strengths, and biz dev obviously being one for you among many others. What aspects of EQ are you focused on in building this network, this mutually beneficial marketplace, and which have you just decided, that's like something my team is going to hire for that or whatever?
Yeah, so really setting the foundations for the tone of the community, because you can extrapolate from that and building out the first communications, the first events, the first conversations, and then providing that framework so others can then take that on. So really setting that culture for our community is where I've spent a lot of the time. And then on the client side, it has been around figuring out what is a conducive business model for the clients today and then potentially in the future. So working on that.
Yep.
And then everything else, I would say that I've done some of.
Yep.
And then handed that over. So like our data infrastructure, for instance, we've got everything from AWS all the way through to lighter tools like Airtable that we'll leverage. And I've set up some of that at the start, but then once it starts to get to the point where you've got to make sure that you've got some of your machine learning or your AI connected to AWS, and back, and I'm way out of my depth there.
Yeah.
And so it's about bringing the right people in.
Tony Hsieh, prior to his death, was a friend, was a real supporter of my annual responsive conference. And I really respected him for, at Zappos, we're a call center company, right? We are a customer service driven shoe store online, which means getting on the phone with people and seeing what we can do to solve their problems. And he modeled that by having everybody at the organization spend some amount of time every year on the phones, no matter what your role is at the company.
Yeah.
I think about that at my old coffee shop of not being, I'm the founder, I'm not behind the counter, but not being so, fancy as to not being willing to get behind the counter and wash dishes if that's what's needed to resolve an issue at the cafe.
Yeah.
Right. And so that knowing what to prioritize, that's high level, that's strategic, that makes a measurable impact for the business, but being willing to do whatever is down and dirty to get the job done.
Yeah, I think understanding your core is key. And then you then attract those people internally around that core competency,
Mm-hmm.
and then it compounds.
Yeah.
And so ours is community. And part of that is ensuring that people who work on the community are in the community and they're having the conversations. And if you see somebody that's posted something and maybe it's kind of interesting, not that interesting, but you scrolled past it, it's not that hard to press the like button.
Yep.
So like spend that
Reinforcing
time
that.
and reinforce, or have a conversation with them and explain your perspective and just take that time because you've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're making a decision and a choice at a certain point. And the community a lot of time is about people being able to have an outlet to express themselves.
Right.
And then feel like they're going to get a reasonable response back.
So I'm really curious, right, in the era that we are now, around the movement for Black Lives, right, post the murder of George Floyd, right, like race and conversations about race in America, in the world, is a hot button topic, especially applied to the workplace. And so you are in building a community around diverse voices, right? Even, I mean, of course, the goal is to help them professionally, but like you must be seeing a lot of really difficult or really edgy conversations. People who are seeing discrimination left and right. I mean, I'm a white man. Like there are so many things I don't even know about. How do you think about balancing? And this is something I think about at Xander Media and with our clients. With we're a messaging company. How do we honor messages that are important while still like aligning with the ROI of the organizations that are hiring us to tell a story, right? So how do you balance the need to form community with like you're building community in ecosystem that is not the world that our parents grew up in, because everything is so fast, the world is changing so quickly, and a lot of those topics that people might want to talk about are really hot for a lot of people.
So all of these topics have existed for years. And so some people are more privy to them based on their experiences
right
in the world.
Yeah.
So a lot of what may be new to others is not new to some. And part of the reason of building this community is none of this is new to me. Like from whether it's discrimination around race, whether it's conversations around people saying, well, why did you get there? Why are you at this point?
Right.
Why are you at a Fortune 500 company as an exec?
Right.
Whether it's conversations saying, oh, you look like X, Y, Z on stage.
Totally.
That's all happened to me personally. And so not surprised, not shocked by any of the conversations. So we don't spend too much time moaning. We spend more time on progressing.
Yep.
And also acknowledging situations and not feeling like you can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so whereas sites that exist today, social sites, you don't necessarily feel like you can put that out there because you don't know how you're going to be treated.
Right.
Everybody in EQ is vetted and verified. And part of the construct is that you have positive energy and each one teaches one. So everybody is really trying to help people move on. So even if you respond to a comment, the intentions, we believe, are at least pure. So when we are balancing it by having real conversations, but focusing on what we can do about personal, individual situations that help us drive things forward. Because a lot of this stuff is just not new.
Right.
And people are tired talking about it. And the question is how do we improve our lives for ourselves and our families and the generations to come? And that's where we spend the majority of our time.
Cool. Yeah. I really like and respect that. Like, okay, yes, and positive output, right? Like, where are we going from here? What is the direction towards the goal that we as a community want to accomplish? And that speaks to your leadership, modeling that. For folks listening, watching, where can they go to learn more about you, your background, your story, and also EQ? And maybe we can talk about who EQ is for and who should apply to be a part of it.
Sure. So if you are an organization that's interested in learning more about EQ, you can just go to eq.community. There's no .com.co, it's just eq.community. We also, and then we've got some useful links on just EQ.app. So we own EQ.app. If you use some social platforms that exist today, like LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, got profile Marcus Sawyer, just first name, last name. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice. And who on the organization side and who on the member side should be interested or might be interested in learning more about EQ and what you all are building?
Yeah, so we, from the organization standpoint, will empower TA leaders and teams, right? So sometimes they don't necessarily want to use traditional methods.
Right, TA being talent acquisition.
Talent acquisition, yeah. And that could obviously falls within HR as well. Also hiring managers that are looking for diverse talent. And then the other thing that we've started to spend a lot more time is just working with the leadership teams and executive teams on building a program that will help you to deliver that talent at scale over a long period of time. So whether that is cultivating your community or that is outsourcing portions of what you're doing in order to make sure that you hit those goals and numbers.
Yeah.
And then from an individual standpoint, it's generally mid to senior level folks that are interested or in tech and have a diverse background. We have a vetting process, but the vetting process is really what is the reason that you came to EQ? What are you willing to contribute to the community? And what would you like to get from the community? And then understanding that and doing a little bit of research on the individuals, we can bring people in. But if you're a member, you have the ability to refer other members. Cool. So our members decide who comes into the community more than me or anybody else.
Right? Yeah, super cool.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to somebody, I'm thinking of some Xander Media clients and lots of people I know want to build community as part of their business and maybe struggle to do so?
So I'll answer this in a couple of ways. Firstly, what you shouldn't do, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then maybe that would lend to some of the things that are available to do. I think what I've seen too often, especially when you're trying to build community, is and it's kind of like leadership, right? You take the top performer from a sales position and you put them into a leadership role. You take the person that needs the support the most. Let's take ERGs or let's take community platforms. And you say, right, you're the head of this committee. But they haven't, and they've got a normal day job to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of value in partnering with folks. And we're starting to pilot that model on how do you start to build a community that's not only right for your organization, but then is in touch with the broader world. So I think it's hard to what you shouldn't do is just hire somebody internally, give them a little bit,
this is the head of community, go.
Yeah, then you go and run that. And I think being thoughtful about that is important. The other thing is why are you building community? I think understanding that purpose and going back to kind of 10P structure, I would look at that. What does that mean for the organization if you can figure this out? And a lot of companies that have great brands or the potential to have great brands inherently have community built into it. And so it's not necessarily that term community itself that's always being used, but you've got fanatics or you've got different types of customers. Right. And if you can see that, you can build that externally, but also internally, because there are people that love your organization or would love for it to succeed. So finding those people and rallying around that and being really clear on where you want to go next, I think is important. And there's a lot of external support and communities and things that are going up at the moment, so you can take a look externally as well.
Yeah, super cool. I think a lot about, especially running a media company, a messaging company, rather than tack on the message to the end, right, after you've built the product. How do you embed the story? How do you embed something that has virality or potential for spreading internal to, how do you bake it into the organization or to the product? And I like this idea of no, community is not something you tack on. Most companies that have a great community have that inherently, have it built in. And so then it's just a matter of harnessing what's already there, the fanatics, the whomever it is.
Yeah, you cultivate it. And I remember something you said to me a while back, and this actually sparked me. So I filmed my son's croissant business because the content is already there.
Is happening.
Right, it's happening now. So and
I want to see those videos.
Yeah,
I'm super excited to see those videos. I love that you recorded
and the editing,
and
so
he's gonna love that 10 years from now.
That's the goal, right? So he's got access to that, and he can then see that, and it's documented.
That means the world. I'm so excited to hear that. Keep going.
Yeah, no, so the point is cultivating what already exists, because a lot of the answers you either have around you or you have them inside you.
Yep.
But we spend less time looking introspectively at what's possible or asking those around us, and then we go externally a lot quicker. And there's a time to do that once you're clear on what you want to achieve. So I think cultivating that is super clear. And then having folks that can help you execute on that, whether that's an agency or it's an organization that's kind of been through that, but being clear on where you want to go.
Yeah. We're coming up against time, and I want to be respectful. I know you have a hard stop. What are practices or advice that you give, whether it's to, your son or your team or, me, for that cultivating of introspection, especially as the leader of, whatever it is, of, in this case, EQ, or of your family, or of, whomever you're talking to? How do you practice that skill?
Try to spend time thinking. Versus, because you can be in execution mode forever, right? And when you're starting a new project, I was speaking to a friend of mine recently, and he's pretty big in the film world. He's got a couple of Emmys, and he's doing well. We had a conversation, and he was like, when you start a project, the start of that project is the only chance that you get to really write that script. So when you're starting something new, just think through it. And I think Amazon got some well-known practices with like their 6-pager. We try and have some practices there, and thinking through that is super important because it will save you a lot of time in the future. So I feel like that's overlooked. And be real with yourself, the reality of it. It doesn't have to be an elaborate business plan to then show with other people and externalize. And when you're trying to fundraise, you're always trying to sell to someone and explain to somebody what it is, but what does this mean to you? And being able to have that, something you have internally that you could share externally and then back it up, I think is important every time you start a new project.
So last couple of questions. I saw that you had listed, I think it was on Crunchbase, that you're an advisor to Beeple. And I got to know, like, we haven't touched on Web3, like, maybe that'll be a round 2 at some point, because I know you have a lot of thoughts there and I'm curious. But like, what is your relationship to Beeple, or did I understand that correctly?
That's a completely different Beeple. So that Beeple is a software as a service company, and it was one of my incubation companies, and they're based out in Belgium. And they actually had that. So they were called beeple.eu. And this was like, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. So no connection.
Cool. Just had to check.
Yeah.
Are you rediscovering, as the father of a 6-year-old, any books that were meaningful to you as a kid or as a teenager? Like, are there books or media that you're uncovering now with your son?
A lot of dinosaur books.
What, any specific?
I mean, there's, I can't even think off the top of my head of his specific books. We read a book every single night.
Cool. So
there's always a different one. There's a couple of books that I've noticed that tell the stories of people that have had an impact in the world. So there's one that we've got one that's on Muhammad Ali in the same book, and then you've got similar one that's on Bruce Lee, and then it's on Gandhi, and you've got a few others as well. And it's a series of books, and it's just, I think it's their story. And cool. they're pretty cool because they're depicted in a more animated view, and then at the end they've got some of kind of the hard documentation.
Cool. Super cool. The series is called Their Story.
Yeah, something along those lines. Like, but so those little books are cool. So yeah.
If you were to get one message out, whether that's to founders or people building community or just to the world, right? Not obviously an advertisement for EQ, like not corporate, not biz dev. What would you want to communicate to people?
Be mindful of the information you take in and the information that you output. I think of what we're doing in this world today as information flow and energy flow. So you have a choice, And don't forget that, especially if you're listening to this, because you're in an environment where you've got connection to the internet of some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So be mindful of what you take in, because what you put out will have an outweighed impact on the future of where you end up.
I love it. Marcus, thank you so much for taking this time. It's really an honor to sit down with you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.